Coast. I am happy to be here with you today for a special session of the Client Enrichment Series. If you can hear the sound of my voice, can someone just hit yes in the chat box, please? Thank you very much, Lorna. You were the first. I appreciate that. As I said, this is a special engagement of the Client Enrichment Series. My name is Eric Fulton. I'm the National Program Manager for Customer Outreach and Communication in the Office of Portfolio Management and Customer Engagement at GSA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Today's session, again, it's a special demonstration session entitled Entering RWAs into GSA's eRETA System with our presenter today, Steve Sacco. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on Steve. He's the National Program Manager for the Reimbursable Services Division. It's part of GSA's Public Building Service in the Office of Design and Construction in Washington, D.C. Steve oversees the Data Management and Process Improvement Team, which manages RETA and eRETA, two of PBS's nationwide IT applications. Additionally, the team provides data and metrics to send to senior management about the health and trending of the Reimbursable Services Program. Before I turn it over to Steve and get started, I do want to mention a couple of housekeeping items. We've automatically muted your audio to help us control the sound quality of the presentation. If you're having a little bit of difficulty with the audio, we ask that you first check the volume of your phone and your computer. If you have a question during the presentation, you can please use the chat pane. You can find that on the right side of your screen. Type your question or comment in the box, and your fellow attendees and our team of subject matter experts, we have a couple of them out there, they'll see your question and might be able to answer it right on the spot. So we encourage this interactive dialogue. Any questions that we're unable to get to today will be noted, and all questions will be answered and posted on our website, and that is www.gsa.gov/CES. If you prefer to suppress the chat feature, you can do so by hitting that four-headed arrow box at the top right-hand corner of your presentation screen. That'll maximize the screen's viewable area, and you can always bring that back in and bring the chat feature back by hitting that button one more time. As a special engagement session of the Client Enrichment Series, today's presentation is more of a demonstration, so there's not a large formal slideshow. There are a couple of slides as well as a eRETA user's guide that we sent out to everybody in advance, and you can feel free to look along with that. You can also find out a lot more information about all of the enhancements to the eRETA system and RWAs in general, www.gsa.gov/eRETA. So we encourage everyone online today to refer back to that to help guide you through this process. So with all of that, I am going to turn over the session today to our presenter, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Eric. Appreciate the great introduction. Welcome, everybody, and we're happy to have you here today. So let's jump into some of this here as I navigate the slides. As Eric mentioned, we do have a few slides, but the large majority of today will be us diving into our eRETA test environment, kind of showing you this with a live example of how this all works. First and foremost, to give you guys all a little bit of a background, just a few weeks ago on May 5th, we introduced several new electronic features to the RWA workflow and the RWA intake process to allow you all, as our RWA customer agencies, the opportunity to interact with us more efficiently and more transparently with RWAs. And we do a lot of them. In case you're not really aware of the volume of RWAs that we do with all of our customer agencies, GSA transacts almost 12,000 new RWAs every single year. So that's a lot of RWAs in a given time span. So we're churning out a lot of work, and of course there's always several thousand RWAs, such as our bigger construction-related efforts that span several years. So you can see the volume of our workload is pretty hefty. So we're pretty excited about these new features here because we can start handling your transactions, handling your RWAs much more quickly, and they're all located in one spot. They're not cluttered on someone's desk, you know, in San Francisco, and another few cluttered on someone's desk across the country in Maine. Everything can now be centralized in the system. So some of the key features that we introduced just a few weeks ago are as follows, 3 mainly, and we're going to really dig deeper on those first 2 today in today's session. So we've now introduced data entry capabilities that allow you to enter or identify your new project or service needs. We're calling them RWA work requests. And now you can enter those. The minute you know them, and the minute you have them, you can have nothing else ready for them other than, hey, I need to renovate our conference room in this office, or I want to replace all the windows in this building, or we need a new roof in this facility. If that's all you know, that's great. That's what an RWA work request is meant to be, for you to kind of initiate that conversation with GSA, but enter it into our system first and foremost so we can begin tracking it, and likewise so you can begin tracking or following it as well. And eRETA, I guess I've done a disservice already. I haven't identified what that means. Highlighted in bold blue there. eRETA stands for our external RWA entry and tracking application. So that's where the eRETA acronym comes from. And that is a system that you all, as customer agencies of GSA, would log into to begin entering this information. And then on our side, on the GSA side, we have what's called RETA. We just dropped the front E there. It's just internal, if you will. And we use RETA to track all of your RWAs. Both of these systems, RETA and eRETA, talk to each other, and that's how we can interact with you in real time in these systems. So after you get past the work request, which is what we'll start off with today, you would effectively then enter the rest of your RWAs. So we're probably filling out the RWA 2957 form in PDF format, or maybe you're just filling it out manually by hand. Either way is acceptable. What we're doing with eRETA is effectively replacing that entirely. Now you can come into our system and enter what the equivalent of page 1 would be directly into our system, and then that interfaces with the second half, or page 2 of the RWA form that GSA typically fills out. So now you have control of entering everything directly into our database, and subject to edits and treasury edits and IPAC edits and other edits to make sure we're not accidentally entering wrong information. But this also gives you control over what data is ultimately sent downstream, because everything that's entered in our RETA and eRETA applications then transmits itself to the billing system, which then all that data is displayed on your billing statements as we bill for the RWA service. So now you guys have access to control that information. So we, as GSA, who had previously been responsible for 100% of the data entry, if we had fat-fingered something in the past or just forgot a very key variable or value to enter on the RWA, now we're cut out of the equation, so to speak, at least when it comes to your data, and you have total control over that. The third and final piece that we introduced just a few weeks ago, we won't talk about that much today, but there's an integrated digital signature solution. If you are interested in learning more about how the integrated digital signatures work, we actually had a session just 2 days ago on Tuesday, but we are offering a repeat session for that on June 1st. So we'll have more information as we go along here on how to register for that second digital signature solution presentation as well. Finally, to recap on these 3 new features, the first 2 will require eRETA access. I'm going to talk about how to get eRETA access here in just a moment. The third feature, digital signatures, do not require eRETA access. So for folks in your region that typically sign RWAs, or if that's you, if you're the one that typically signs your RWAs on behalf of your agency in Block 18A, you would not need eRETA access to do that, to be able to apply your signature. You can do that with just having an email address. But again, if you're really interested in how digital signatures work, we highly encourage you to attend our next session on that topic on June 1st. So, all these features are optional, but we're highly encouraging you to use them. So we're not saying effective May 5th when we roll these out to say, all right, stop giving us paper, stop signing your RWAs manually, you have to use all of our digital tools now. We're not saying that at all. Although we highly encourage you to do that, because we want you to start using these, and we feel that they're a great alternative to the old manual processing we've been doing for years and years and years now. So the biggest website to take away from today, which I'll repeat probably another 452 times, is the website you see on this slide here, www.gsa.gov/eRETA, all lowercase. On this site, we have a whole host of information. First and foremost, the biggest one is instructions on gaining access to eRETA. If you do not have an eRETA user ID and password yet, that's the first website you'll want to go to and follow our application process. It's a 3-step process to gain access to eRETA, to then be issued credentials, a user ID and password to log in. If you already have eRETA access, which you may already have, eRETA has been around for a little over 5 years now. We rolled it out in 2011 as purely a read-only application. So if you already have an eRETA user ID, but only a read-only mode version, you simply have to email us at ereta@gsa.gov to request we upgrade your account to a data entry role. So we'll have more on that too later in the presentation. But if you already have access today, you don't have to go through that whole process again. We just need to enhance your existing account to have data entry capabilities. Also on that website, gsa.gov/eRETA, we have user guides on both the digital signature solution and on entering work requests, which is what today's presentation is going to be about. We will also have video training demonstrations, which is essentially just what you're witnessing today. We're recording these sessions or a session like these, and we'll post it on our website as well for people that may not have been able to attend one of our live training sessions today or later this month. And then lastly, and this is where you can sign up for other digital, or sign up for that other digital signature presentation on June 1st. That website also has links to register for that other training session throughout the rest of this month, and technically June 1st being the last training session we will be offering. So once again, don't forget it, that website, www.gsa.gov/eRETA, will have all that information. Okay, so enough of all the background. Let's get into the meat of it, right? We really want to see how this works and what it means for us. So before I jump into the training environment or the test environment, just some quick background or high-level overview, I guess is a better way to describe it, of how this whole process works. So customer agencies can now come into eRETA and submit their new project or service need, again, what we're calling an RWA work request, and it's routed to the appropriate region, the appropriate GSA region. And you can probably fill it out in quickly 30 to 60 seconds. After you do your first one, it's such a cinch. It's only 5 required fields. Just want to know who you are, where you are, what you need done, and that's about it. And we'll show you what that looks like here shortly. Once it's routed to the appropriate GSA region, we will review the request and then assign you a GSA project manager to then work with you to kind of fill out the requirements, cost estimating, everything that naturally happens when we want to take an idea, a project need or a service need, from that concept to an eventual accepted RWA. So you continue to do that stuff, requirements, development, cost estimating, all offline. That stuff won't necessarily be done in eRETA, although supporting documents will be uploaded and available for download from eRETA. So everything that you might discuss with GSA in this time period would ultimately make its way into the application and into our documentation tool, so you have access and reference to it down the line. Once we've done all that stuff, you'd return to eRETA, and effectively, instead of filling out page 1 of the RWA 2957 form, you would instead enter all the information directly into eRETA into the corresponding fields. You can still fill out the RWA form. Again, like I said, all these tools are optional, not required yet, but we highly encourage you to begin converting to entering the stuff directly into the application instead of filling out the RWA form. As I alluded to earlier, the system also includes GSA and Treasury edits to ensure only valid data is entered, to make sure we don't hit any rejections downstream. For example, when we go to bill you, if a Treasury symbol is invalid, the Treasury IPAC system would then bounce back and say we can't bill this RWA. We make sure that doesn't happen by editing and reviewing it and validating it up front before it even gets that far. And then from here, once you've filled all of this out, let's say you've done everything into our system, you can still choose to upload a signed form. So after you've entered everything into eRETA, you can still print out a 2957 form with all the data you entered in the appropriate block and then sign it with pen and ink or however you typically sign it. Or you can choose to use the integrated digital signature feature and have the RWA routed to your fund certifying official to apply his or her signature in the appropriate block. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the demo here to kind of show you what this all looks like. For those of you that might be joining us just by audio, you haven't logged in to join us by to visually to see the demonstration that I'm sharing on my screen, don't worry about it. We still have a way for you to follow along pretty closely. If you go to that website I mentioned earlier, once again, www.gsa.gov/eRETA, and you scroll down maybe 5 to 10% of the way, not too far, there's a user guide in there titled Submitting RWA Work Request to GSA and eRETA. That user guide will have a lot of pictures in there as well. We'll kind of follow along with the live demo I'm about to do. It won't follow it identically, but it'll be a helpful tool to follow along with how the functionality works. Okay, so let me escape out of this demonstration and go into our test environment. So let me log in here first as if I was a customer agency user. So right now, I've just logged into the eRETA application as if I was a customer agency user. And this is the eRETA welcome screen that any user would see when he or she logs into the application. We'd have a note up here on the message note board. It would tell you who you are. In this case, it's a little bit of an odd email address. Again, this is our test environment, so we don't have a real person's name. It's just this funky looking email address to represent a customer. And then my agencies, what agencies do I have access to? Obviously, this is a little bit of an unusual situation just because it's our test environment. Typically, someone would not have access to Department of Homeland Security AD codes and Social Security AD codes and IRS AD codes. So this is a mix because it's our test environment. So we were trying to test out actions for multiple customers with one user ID. So just understand that that's not the case here. Uh-oh. Looks like my screen might have been lost. Let me reshare it here. Okay, there we go. I think my screen is back up. Sorry about that. I guess our meeting space hiccuped there temporarily. So let's enter a new work request. Let's say you've had discussions with your project managers or whoever it might be in your agency, and you've determined, hey, we have this new need for an RWA from GSA, so let's get that ball rolling. Let's enter a work request in eRETA to let them know we have this new need. So what you do is you'd come up here to the navigation bar where you have various searches. To search for previous RWAs already in the system or other work requests already in the system, and I'll show you how to query work requests already in the system here in a little bit after I create our first one. So I want to navigate to this data entry tab, and I have two options here, to create a work request or to modify an existing work request and or RWA. So in this case, I want to create a brand new one. I'll select that. And I come to this screen. So if you recall in the overview slides, I said it would take you about 30 to 60 seconds to enter a work request and send it to GSA. And hopefully this screen is proof of that. What you're seeing here is the only thing that GSA needs for you to fill out and send to us to begin that process. So the work request is literally this one screen. And if you look at those little red asterisks, which represent a required field, you can see there's very few of them. It should take you a very short amount of time to give us at least the bare bones information so that we can then determine who to assign as a GSA project manager. So in this case, the first thing you're going to tell us is who you are. What agency bureau are you representing? Now again, the pull-down menu in your case might only have one selection. It's all based on the agency bureau code or codes we granted your eRETA user ID access to. Now in this case, like I mentioned, it's a test environment, so I gave myself lots of different agencies, but this would be an unrealistic scenario in real life. So for today's presentation, I'm going to pretend to be Social Security Administration. So the next thing I have to do is outline or indicate where do I want this work done. Now we really, really, really want you, if you know it, to enter the GSA building number. If you happen to know GSA's building number because you've done so many RWAs with us that you know GSA's building number better than we do, we want you to enter it here. If you're not sure of the building number, we also have this little magnifying glass icon right here. This allows you to search for a building number based on other criteria. So if I click on that, you'll see I get this pop-up menu or pop-up window instead. So I could, for example, search for all buildings in a specific city and state or at the address, and then I would get a list here. So for example, if I did Denver, Colorado, and I ran a search, I would come back with 32 buildings that are located in Denver, Colorado, and then I could further refine that search by entering a city or state, for example. If I still couldn't find my building this way or nothing seemed to match up exactly right, I can close out of this, and the last opportunity is then to instead give us where is this building located or where do you want this work done. Give me a state. Once you select your state in the pull-down menu, then you'll have your list of cities here based on which state you selected, and then we just need a street address or some other identifier to say, okay, this is where you want the work done. This is important because it helps the system to route this request to the appropriate GSA region. So for purposes of today, I'm just going to type in the GSA building number since I happen to know what it is. So let's type in this. And as you can see in this case, since I knew the building number, the city, state, and address all automatically populated it for me. The next required field, you can see there's some additional optional fields here as far as, well, can you give me a specific room number that you want this work to be done in, or a specific location in the facility? Do you have a requested service period, for example, if you were doing overtime utilities or some other service that had a definitive start and end time for construction or renovation or changes to space where, you know, you don't really know, you would leave the service period blank because that would be determined by the project manager later on down the road. So the next required field here is estimated amount. This is really easy. It's a pull-down menu with 3 options. It's really a small, medium, or large concept. We're just trying to size the RWA, our potential RWA, so we know how to route it internally. Some of our GSA regions route work based on dollar size. Other regions route work just based on physical location. So this is only helping us route that work if we need to route it within that particular region. If you're wrong, if you selected over $150,000 and the estimate came out to be $149,000, we're not going to make you start over from scratch. It's just to help us gauge it roughly about how big or small or medium the project size might be. Okay. The next to last required field is who are you? Who should GSA reach out to contact once we've assigned that project manager so we can begin having those conversations sit down and do requirements development, do cost estimating, do all that stuff with you so we can really fine tune what it is exactly that you need done in your space. So the pull down menu pre-populates with the names of Social Security administration and staff that's done or who's been involved with RWAs in the past. If the appropriate name or your name is not here, you always have the add new feature to then add your name to this list. And moving forward on future work requests and future RWAs, your name will now pre-populate, or that new name will pre-populate in this pull down menu, so you don't have to enter it from scratch each time. The last required field on this work request is description requirements. What is it that you need done? So we want to know in some level of detail what it is you want or are asking GSA to do on your behalf. Okay, so I put in a description there, and that is all the required fields. So obviously this took us a few minutes because I was trying to explain in a little bit more detail what each of the fields was about. But in real life, after you've done one of these once, you can whiz through them in under a minute. I'm confident of that. To point out some of the other fields that aren't required but optional that may or may be of use, may or may not be of use to you depending on what work request you're doing. The main one at the very top right here is estimate tracking number. This is particularly helpful with, say, overtime utilities, where GSA is typically giving you an overtime utility estimate a few months in advance of the new fiscal year. So roughly this time of year, May, June, and July is when GSA is giving you some estimates for your overtime utilities for the FY18 fiscal year. So if you already have that in your possession and you came here to do the work request, say on October 1st, for example, to begin that work, to begin that process of getting an RWA in place for your FY18 overtime utilities, you could cite or copy and paste in here that overtime utility estimate tracking number that we've already given you on the estimate. And that will immediately link that estimate to this work request so we know they're related. And so we highly encourage that as opposed to you creating a brand new work request when you already have an estimate out there. That might lead GSA to think these are two unique projects when in fact they were just one project or one service need. The other optional field that I'll draw your attention to is the GSA project manager / point of contact. This is not intended for you to say, hey, I've worked with John Doe at GSA before, he's great, I want him to work on this project too. That's not the intention of this. You could do that, but we might not actually assign John Doe to that project. Why this is on here for you as a customer is to indicate, hey, you know, I've already talked to John Doe about this particular renovation of conference room 42A a little bit offline already, so he's familiar with it to some extent. So I'm going to put John Doe into the GSA region. They might be able to talk to John and say, hey, how much do you know? What else can you tell us that might not have been provided? And we can have those conversations, you know, internally in GSA to then determine, okay, you know what, John, you keep moving with this project, you will be the official project manager, or you know what, John, your workload's too much right now. We're going to assign this to Jane instead as the project manager. So that, in a nutshell, is the work request. So there's 2 steps to finally send this off to GSA. First, you save it, obviously. If you let the system time out or you went lunch, you'd lose all the information you just entered here, so we want to save it first. And 2 things happen here when you save it. I haven't sent it to GSA yet, but I've saved it. But 2 things happened. First and foremost, at the top left here, you now have this unique tracking number. It starts with a W to represent it's a work request. It's not an RWA yet, but it's a tracking number. The nice thing about that number, so ignore the W for the time being, but focus on the 7-digit number that follows. That 7-digit number will be your RWA number, assuming this becomes an RWA, for the lifetime of this. So now you have one of our tracking numbers on day 1. So when this becomes an R-type or an F-type or an N-type RWA or whatever it might be, the prefix might change, the letter will change, but the number will always be the same. So you can always track this work request or RWA by that unique number from this point forward. Additionally, the second thing that happens when you save it is the GSA region is assigned. This may or may not be of importance to you, but now you know where this work request is going to be routed to, in this case to GSA Region 3. So I've saved it, so it's a 2-part process. So now to send it to GSA, I have to hit the Submit Request button. You'll first be encountered with this acknowledgement message, which is asking you or identifying to you that just because you're submitting this work request to GSA right now does not in any way guarantee that we will be able to accept this RWA. So don't put an obligation on your book. We're not that far in the process yet. The second half of the note is about late fiscal year submissions and when we can or can't accept it, or when we can or cannot consider it for acceptance for the current fiscal year. We have those year-end customer letters. They were issued, I believe, a week or 2 ago now, and they're also posted on our website, www.gsa.gov/RWA. So if you're unaware of what our year-end deadlines are for fiscal year 17, please go to that website and download the year-end customer letter that outlines those fiscal year 17 deadlines. So once you read this message, it's going to be the same one every time, every work request, but you probably should read it at least once. You're just going to click here to acknowledge that, and then send it off to GSA. And now I've gotten confirmation that my work request has been submitted to GSA. We will contact you shortly based on, or to let you know who's going to be working on it, who the GSA project manager will be that will be working on this project with you. So that's the work request process in a nutshell. I want to take a temporary break here. I still have a lot more to show you. Don't think that's it. The next parts I want to show you is I'm going to log in as the GSA person who would have gotten this in their inbox and show you how we assign the project manager to these work requests. And then the next part after that is to then show you how to find your work requests, how to run reports on them. But then more so, let's say the requirements development, cost estimate, all that stuff has now finished. How do I come back into eRETA as the customer agency and fill out the rest of my RWA and then submit that to GSA in lieu of doing it the old-fashioned way where I'm filling out the RWA 2957 form by hand or on my computer in the PDF format. So before I move on to that, I'll take a pause here for any questions that might be appropriate to ask.
Steve, this is Eric, and we do have a question on the board, and that question is, can I attach a scope of work, or do I need to put just copy the information into the description of requirements field when I enter the work request? Great question, great question. So perfect timing. So in this case, what we've asked, and this is outlined if you look at the user guide that's on gsa.gov/eRETA. We do have instructions on how to do this, but obviously the question was asked here, so I want to show you in person too. So I've just sent this work request to GSA. And even though I've sent it, I can still attach documents. And this is actually the more appropriate time to attach those documents because the GSA person is not going to be in eRETA, within 3 milliseconds of when you sent this to us. We'll probably review it, but it'll take us, a few hours, maybe a few days to give you the true assignment. So this is the perfect time after I just hit send to GSA to attach my scope of work or any other supporting documents I might have. So from this screen here that I just I'm on now, I'd scroll down to the bottom, and now we have two hyperlinks here. There's documentation hyperlink and then a comments hyperlink. What I'd want to do is click on documentation, and I'd be taken to the documentation tab of this work request. I'm still inside this single work request. I'm not out
in the middle of nowhere. This is tied directly to the one I just sent to GSA Region 3. And on this tab here is kind of your hanging file for the RWA. So everything's electronic. So over time, this page will get filled with more and more documents, copies of estimates, copies of the RWA, copies of customer letters, etc. But it's at this tab where I can now upload my scope of work or any other supporting document. I would click the Upload New button here, and I would be prompted to, oh, that's right. So this is a good note. Do as I say, not as I do opportunity. So I'm in Google Chrome right now, and eRETA is only 100% compatible with Internet Explorer. So one of the features that's not compatible in Chrome is this Upload New button. That's why nothing happened. But if I was in Internet Explorer, again, do as I say, not as I do, the Upload New button would just pop up a new window, and then you could upload the documents from your desktop, from your shared drive, from wherever. So uploading documents into RETA and eRETA is the same way you upload documents or attach documents to your email. So that's how you would do it. So to repeat those steps just one more time, it's really simple, but I kind of explained it really longly, is that I've just sent it to GSA, which was left us on this screen here. I scroll down and click on my documentation link to take you to the documentation details file for this RWA or work request. And then I just click the Upload New button to then upload documents. Once GSA gets it, once they start reviewing on their end, they would see any documents you would have uploaded here already, so it's accessible to them as well. So that's how you could upload a scope of work, for example, with this work request. We have another question, and then I can jump or continue moving forward with the next steps of the demo.
We have one additional question before we move on, and that's how long should we allow for a response to a work request?
That's a good question. I don't have a great answer for you yet. I guess my answer would be you are the customer after all, and so part of that's on your end. You know, how comfortable or how long would it normally take? You know, doing it. We've communicated with the GSA project manager offline, you know, over phone or in person or over email. How long would you wait in that case to follow up? We've advised our regions to try to assign these relatively quickly, and each region is kind of figuring that out as far as, you know, how often they're going to meet with the project management staff in the region to say, hey, we have these 25 new work requests that came in yesterday from these 10 different agencies. You know, how do we or who should we assign them to? So in some cases, you might get a project manager assigned to you in, you know, a couple of minutes, a couple of hours. In other cases, especially if it's a super complex project or a big project, it might take GSA a few more days. But I wouldn't wait. You know, I guess my ultimate stance would be, you know, if I don't hear anything from GSA within, you know, 5 business days, so 1 week, I'm going to follow up with them to see where the status of that work request might be. So that would be my recommendation. Okay, so let me now, great questions, let me now log out and log back in as if I was the GSA person in Region 3 that was going to start working on this. Let me just copy this number just to be safe. All right, and I'm going to log in as a GSA Region 3 person here. Let me find my, there it is. Okay, so what would have happened after you hit that send button as a customer agency is the Region 3 people or Region 3 individuals who are tasked with of receiving these new work requests and working to get them assigned to a GSA project manager, that person or persons in Region 3 would have received an email instantaneously from the system to say, hey, Social Security Administration sent us an email or sent us a new work request in building in Virginia for this work in conference room 42B. So it would have outlined, or that email would have said everything that effectively you entered into the work request to let them know that was out there. I, as a GSA person or as a RETA user, an internal RETA user, would now come into the application and look for your work request or pull it up. So the email would have the number. That would probably be the easiest way for me to find it. Alternatively, I could look for all work requests that were unassigned. So unassigned means you, as a customer, have sent it to us, but we, as GSA, have not yet assigned a project manager. So that would be another way I might look for things. In this case, I have 2 work requests in our test environment, but this latter one is the one that we just did. So I'm going to pull that one up here. So now I see everything that you, or as the Social Security eRETA user has entered already. I see everything that they've put into the system so far. And now my role as the GSA user is pretty simple, but there's some backstage discussions going on in that region first and foremost before I make this, or I take this action. And that is primarily that the RETA user, the GSA RETA super user who would be doing this action that I'm about to show you, is having conversations with the supervisor project manager in that region to say, SSA sent us this new work request for this, that, and the other thing. You know, who should be the project manager I assign with? Once those discussions happen and they get the information, they get that response, then they'd return here, maybe in a few hours, maybe a day or 2 later, and take this next action, which is to assign the work request to that project manager. So I, as GSA, have 3 things to do. One of them, obviously, is to assign the project manager. The other 2 is to assign a data entry user. So this is going to be the person responsible for entering GSA's half of the RWA. So that might not be so important to you, but it's still an action we need to take on GSA's side. The second of 3 required things is to enter the building number. Now in this case, SSA entered the GSA building number, so I'm just going to verify. In this case, it looks right. But had SSA, in this case, just entered Falls Church, Virginia, and 5107 Leesburg Pike, but did not enter the building number, it's my responsibility to translate that address and city and state into a GSA building number that ties back to our building database. And then the last thing, obviously the most important thing here, is for me as the GSA person to assign that project manager. So you know, so we can communicate back to you, or communicate back to SSA in this case, who they'll be working with, who is their project manager. So in this case, I'm going to enter my name actually, just for the sake of doing this test environment, or doing this demo. And now my name is listed as the GSA project manager. So those are the 3 things. It's pretty quick to do. GSA data entry user, verify the building number, and then enter the GSA project manager who will be assigned to this. And now I will send it off to the agency. So now I'm assigning the work request. Now what will happen here, or should happen here, is I get this confirmation. And at the same time now, an email has been automatically sent out to 4 individuals. And all 4 of those individuals are listed on this screen we're looking at right now. So the email would have gone out to this crazy looking email address we had for the customer agency user I had logged in previously. It would have gone to Maria, who I've assigned as the GSA data entry user. The email would have gone to Angelo, who I've identified, or who SSA identified as the point of contact for SSA to work on this project. And the email would have also come to myself as the GSA project manager. So all 4 of those individuals received the same email, and they're all on the same email, so they know who everyone is. And effectively, that email is introducing each party to each other. Hey, SSA, your GSA project manager is going to be Steve Sacco. Here's his email. Here's his phone number. Hey, Steve, you've been assigned to do this new work request, or to work on this potential RWA with SSA in Falls Church, Virginia, for under $2,500 to renovate their conference room 42A. So all parties are now on the same email, being effectively introduced to each other. And it's from that point in time that we go into our typical, we kind of leave eRETA for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, depending on how long it takes us to have discussions, have meetings, to finalize requirements, to finalize cost estimates, to finalize everything else that we ultimately do in advance of eventually getting to the point in time where we're ready to accept your RWA, and the point in time where you're ready to begin filling out page 1 of the 2957 form and signing that RWA. Okay, so I want to now that I've assigned this, I can show you how the customer would come back into you. So let's say fast forward a few weeks, right? We've had all of our offline meetings, discussions. with GSA and SSA to finalize requirements and cost estimates and all that good stuff. And now we're ready to enter the RWA, or if I'm representing Social Security Administration right now, I'm ready to give GSA page 1 of that form. So before I jump into that, I'm going to pause here temporarily to see if there's any questions on the assignment function that I just did as GSA to assign that work request to, essentially assign it to myself in this test case as the GSA project manager. Is there any questions I can answer, or should I keep moving along with the demo?
So Steve, there's no questions on the board, but I do want to point out to our participants we are aware of the chat history situation at the moment, but if you have any immediate questions for Steve, please put them into the chat. It should be performing now, and we're going to work on recovery. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Well, I'll continue on with my demonstration here. I know you guys have lots of questions, so don't worry. We're going to answer all of them here today, or as many as we can anyway. So that whole process happened. Fast forward a few weeks, like I mentioned. Now let's say, let me log back out and log in as the log back in as the SSA user, so a customer agency, and show you what happens next. So the work request process, for all intents and purposes, is essentially finished. Now we've kind of transitioned from work request to, okay, I'm ready to get this to become an accepted RWA with GSA. So now I'm logged back in as a customer agency user into eRETA. In this case, we'll just pretend I'm only Social Security. So there's a few ways to find your work request. I had alluded to this earlier. So let me go to the basic search. So obviously, if I'm keeping track of all my work requests on the side, on a piece of paper, for example, or a Word doc, I might know the number, and I could just plug it into here and find the work request related to the one we just did real easy. Let's say I'm not keeping track of it on a piece of paper or on a Word document or anywhere else. That's fine. There's a whole host of other ways to find your work requests, especially if you're the one who's doing the data entry, you've initiated them in the system. One quick way, or one of the search fields that's really easy, is to click this little faceless icon here. If you click that, it'll automatically populate your user ID for eRETA. So that's going to find any work requests. If I run the search now, it's going to find any work request that you, or even any RWA for that matter, that might have become that you initiated in the system, that you're the quote-unquote owner of. In this case, there's several, 18 that we've done in our test environment, and that might be a little overwhelming. Well, wait a minute, that hasn't really filtered anything down. I want to find the stuff I've done just for, Falls Church, Virginia, for example, like the one we just did. So you could filter that out by adding additional search criteria. So, for example, the building number, or if we wanted to say just Falls Church. Let's say we had a whole host of projects in Falls Church, but that they were spread across multiple buildings. I could run that search by adding Falls Church as the city. And now the combination of Falls Church as the city, my user ID as the customer data entry user, I've whittled it down to just that single work request that we just did. And of course, any combination, obviously there's a whole host of other search features to use here, and everything works as an AND operator. So the more search fields I fill out, if I add building number, if I added BOAC, if I added some of my agency accounting data, the smaller and smaller and smaller the search results will get, because you're asking for more specific combination of search criteria. So I found my work request. It's 2 weeks later after I initially sent it out to GSA. They assigned it pretty quickly, within 24 hours. We've had my offline conversations with the requirements development. Now I'm ready to start giving or my RWA and want to send it to GSA. So I find my work request. I open it up. I now enter it in edit mode. And what you'll see now here is I have these 3 additional tabs have now become active for me to enter my customer-specific information. The final 3 tabs that you see here that are grayed out or disabled, those are GSA or PBS only tabs. So those equate to page 2 of the RWA. So obviously you wouldn't be filling those out as a customer. That's information that only GSA would fill out. But the reason why you can see them is that once this becomes an RWA, or once we accept this as an RWA, you will have access to review these tabs. You'll see the data on these tabs. You just don't have access to edit or manipulate the data on those tabs. They're read-only still for you because they are PBS-only information. So let me move on then to the first tab. And now all this stuff that's on here equates to normally fill out on the RWA 2957 form. So for example, what's your billing type? Are you IPAC or non-IPAC? Social Security is typically IPAC. What's your agency location code? You can enter that information here. So let me find an agency location code. Another example, please bear with me. So enter my agency location code. And then I want to enter my BOAC. If I happen to know my billing office address code or BOAC, I can enter that there. If I'm not quite sure of it, I can use the magnifying glass, which again acts as a search feature to look for codes based on other values. So I can pull up my BOAC search here and look for my BOAC. There might be lots of them, and that's the case. In this case, there's 54 BOACs alone that match SSA with this agency location code, so I might want to whittle it down a little bit more. So my billing city and state, let's say it's Baltimore, Maryland. And now my list gets a little bit shorter. So let me just pick one for the sake of this demonstration. So now on this page, I've identified I want to be billed by IPAC on a monthly basis. Here's my agency location code, and here's my billing office address code. Agency certified amount, if you have an estimate in hand already with GSA, you can enter that amount here. It should match up. If you don't know yet, or you guys, or if GSA and SSA in this case are still going back and forth on what the final estimate will be for, we can still leave this as 0. At the end of the day, before we accept this RWA, we will update that amount, whether SSA updates it in eRETA or GSA updates it for you in RETA. We can update that at a later time. So everything doesn't have to be entered. It has to be entered before we submit it, but it doesn't have to all be entered in one sitting. You can come back and piecemeal this together a little bit at a time. So all the other fields on this page are optional. It's not all customer agencies use it, but obviously if you have, for example, the customer order number, that might be something you might want to use or enter your values there. If you have a billing point of contact, so billing questions should be directed to who in your agency. You can enter their name or their email address here. Again, a pre-populated list would show. And anything else that's optional, of course, you would fill out accordingly. Now the accounting details tab here, this captures the fund year, the fund type, the fund expiration date, your treasury symbol, everything related to the appropriation that you're using to fund this particular RWA. So let's say 2017. For now, we'll say $0 because the cost estimate isn't finalized yet. Let's just assume that's true in this particular example. So I'll still put 0. I'll enter the dollar amount later when I know it. Annual funds, and then a treasury symbol here. So let me find a treasury symbol for and then agency accounting data description. So all the information on this particular tab, your fund year and fund type, your treasury symbol, the agency accounting data, this is an example of data that all of this data on this particular tab does get sent down to Treasury whenever we bill you. So this will show up on your IPAC billing statement. This will show up on your GSA billing statements. So this information, if you want to make sure it's specific and accurate, because someone else in the agency looks at that to tie it back to this RWA when they have to pay a bill, this is where you'd want to make sure all this information is accurate and correct, because this stuff does directly get translated onto the RWA billing statements later on in the RWA lifecycle. And last but not least, to round up the required data on page 1 of the RWA is who's signing this RWA. So I talked a little bit about digital signatures a little while ago, or not a little while ago, but earlier on today. Now, customer agencies have the opportunity to use our integrated digital signature solution, or they can continue to manually sign the RWA. So all of the data I've just entered let's say I want to manually sign the RWA still. So I'm not completely convinced I want to use the new digital signature routing that we offer yet, so I still want to manually sign the RWA. And you have that opportunity, or you have that right to do so. So I'd select the manual signature button here, and now I just need to enter the information about who is going to sign this RWA. So actually, before I even do that, I could, in this case, print out the Form 2957. And what would happen here, yeah, that's what I thought. So first and foremost, I need to know who is going to be signing the RWA before I can print out the form. So I'll say, well, I haven't yet signed it yet. I'm trying to generate the form for that. But in this case, Tony is going to sign the RWA. So now that I've identified that, I can print out the form by clicking on the button. And what's going to generate here, or should generate here, there we go. Scroll down some, is now the application, or now RETA, has generated a 2957 form with all the information that you've entered in it so far. So everything is here, and all you would need to do in this point in time, obviously page 2 is still blank because GSA has not filled out their half of it yet, but I would now be able to print this out. I won't actually print it, but that's how you would do it. You would print this out. I could then sign it, or in this case, Tony would sign the RWA in the appropriate block here, in block 18A, and date it in block 18B. And then once I had Tony's signature in my possession, I would come back and I'd enter the date he signed it. So let's say he signed it today. And furthermore, I would click the Upload New button here to upload into the system the signed copy, the manual pen and ink signature version of the RWA, so that I had it on file. Alternatively, if you wanted to digitally sign it, and we'll get into more of these details if you join us on our June 1st demonstration of the integrated digital signature solution, I could click electronic signature request. In that case, I have to indicate who's going to sign it digitally. In this case, we'll assume it's still Tony, right? But now I would just send this to GSA. So how our digital signatures work, just to give you a quick, 60-second spiel on that process, is today, so that's like the current process. So today, when you're typically filling out your RWA form, page 1, you have Tony, let's say in this case, Tony signs the RWA in block 18A, and then you give the whole sign, page 1, to GSA. GSA then goes in, we enter page 2, we enter that page 2 information into RETA as well. We have GSA's approved official sign the RWA, and now we have both signatures that might have come, the customer signature might have come on day 1, and the GSA signature happened on day 5, and at that point in time, on day 5, we accept the RWA. With digital signatures, the signatures, the two signatures, the customer signature, aka the fund certifying official signature, and the GSA approving signature are the final two pieces of information captured before we accept the RWA. So in this case, if SSA had opted to fill out all the information as they did on these first 4 tabs, but they wanted Tony to sign the RWA electronically or digitally, I use those two words interchangeably, they would select this button here, electronic signature request. They'd indicate that Tony would be the one who would sign it electronically, and then they'd send it to GSA. It's only after GSA then comes into the same RWA on our end, and we fill out these final 3 tabs that are grayed out to you because they equate to page 2. Once those are all filled out, we as GSA in that region would then finally route this RWA for signature. And when that happens, it would go to Tony first. Tony would get an email to apply his signature to this RWA. Again, Tony would not need eRETA access to apply his signature. Once Tony applied his digital signature, the RWA would automatically be routed to GSA's approving official, whoever he or she might be. They would apply his or her signature, and now the RWA would automatically be sent back to RETA and sent into our financial management database, and we would have an accepted RWA. So the final 2 pieces of the puzzle in this new electronic workflow is that the 2 signatures come as the next to last and the very last piece of information before we accept the RWA. Once both signatures are applied, we then send out the acceptance letter to all the individuals who would typically get the acceptance letter for an RWA. So this is a good spot to pause here and see if we have any questions that I can answer for anybody right now, because I covered a lot of stuff there. I essentially shortened 3 to 4 to 5 weeks of work in about 7 minutes demonstration. So if there's any questions I can answer right now?
And Steve, there's a lot of questions going on in the chat. I think that our RWA experts are fielding them. We have a few minutes left, so if there's anything generally you want to leave us with, I'd invite you to share that now.
Okay, well, I have several other things I'd still love to show you all. It looks like we're coming up on the first hour. This session was, we devoted 90 minutes to the session, so I still have some more stuff. I don't plan to use up all 90 minutes unless you guys have a whole ton of questions that I can answer, but I still have a few more things I'd love to show you guys, so I can continue on with that, and we'll take another pause.
Can I interrupt with a breaking question, Steve?
Okay.
We do have a question on the board, and it is, can the system track what stage of the review the RWA is at?
Yes and no. I guess the term review is a little bit ambiguous because I think that means something different to a lot of different people. So I guess it depends what we meant by review. The system has a status up here. If you see right here, there's a status. Right now, this is an assigned work request as GSA. So the next step of this process, because we haven't accepted this RWA yet, right? It's still a work request quasi transitioning into an RWA, is that once in this case, I would be the GSA region who's managing this RWA. Once the GSA region comes back in for this specific work request, the next thing that they do here is they convert the W to the appropriate type, whether that's an F type or an N type or A type, whatever that type is. And furthermore, the GSA region would then begin filling out these final 3 tabs. The status converts from assigned to pending new RWA. The next phase after that is once we route the RWA for signatures and we get both signatures, the pending new RWA now upgrades to a successfully submitted RWA. So what you could always do, the status button you see here, or status label, is a hyperlink, and the status label throughout the system is always a hyperlink. In fact, anything that you see as a hyperlink will open up the glossary and read it to give you a more expanded definition of what that term means. So if I click on the status, and this is particularly helpful to look at, it jumped me to the wrong spot here. That's the only downfall with our test environments is sometimes there's a little quirks in it. So the status here, the status definition, you can see is rather lengthy, but we have a whole host of statuses to identify where in the process an RWA or a work request before an RWA might be. So you can see there's 4 statuses for work requests. So if it's one of these statuses, this is what it means. Once it becomes an RWA, if it's pending new or mod initiated or pending mod or et cetera, there's a whole host of definitions for what these statuses mean. So as far as kind of giving you, both the customer and GSA, a sense of where in the process or what status is my RWA at right now, that status field will always give you a good sense of, where are we? Is this still a work request? Is this an RWA? Is there an action required on my end? Is there an action required on GSA's end? So that might be one way to track the kind of status of this. What I can say, and I'll give you guys a quick glimpse into what we're trying to do for fiscal year 18, is the following. So right now, the digital signature solution, which you're seeing right here, is only includes 2 people maximum. One customer agency person, so the fund certifying official, they apply their signature in block 18A of the form, and then there's the GSA approving official, block 28A. So right now, the digital signature routing is only at a maximum going to the 2 individuals that would normally sign the RWA, because there's only 2 signature blocks on the RWA form at present time. What we're looking to do to expand this functionality is we're not going to add signature blocks to the form, but we have gotten information back from customers and GSA internally as well that, you know what, we like to route some of our RWAs, maybe the bigger ones, the really expensive ones, the high dollar ones. We want to route those to a few people first for them to give their thumbs up before we finally have Tony apply his signature. In this case, since Tony's the person I have listed here. So in that case, you might want to route it to person number 1, person number 2, and person number 3. And once all 3 of those individuals give their concurrence or buy-in, it then finally goes to Tony to apply his signature. Similarly, on the GSA side, we might have a similar routing that has to go to representatives in our OCFO office first, and then to our legal counsel office second, and then to the regional project manager third, before it finally goes to John Doe to sign the RWA on behalf of GSA. So we are adding those additional optional routing features sometime in fiscal year 18. I don't have an exact timeline on when that will be. I have to still secure funding from our IT governance board to do that, but I know it's a high priority of GSA to do that. So that is something we are looking to build upon in a subsequent release. Unfortunately, right now, how it's built, the only two people that it will get routed to, at least electronically, would be the fund certifying official for the customer and the GSA approving official for GSA. Obviously, you can still do your routing internally. It's just that eRETA or RETA won't help you do that. You'd have to do that offline through some other mechanism that you might currently be using today. The system won't accommodate you yet, but that is forthcoming. Okay. So let me show the following. So this was a brand new project, right? So the demonstration we've done so far has been all brand new, correct? We signed in as SSA. We sent in our work request for Leesburg or for Falls Church, Virginia. The GSA Region 3 person, they saw it, they assigned the GSA data entry user, they assigned the GSA project manager, and it's at that point in time, all those individuals got an email, the same email that introduced them to each other. And then from there, next steps, they set up meetings, they set up conference calls, they set up whatever they needed to do to flush out full requirements, flush out cost estimates, etc. After that, I came back in as SSA, and I filled out the rest of my RWA on these 4 tabs. And now I've sent it off to, I can send it off to GSA. I'll just show you what that looks like. Oops, sorry. That's right, I have to change the dollar amount from $0 to the actual dollar amount before I send it to GSA. So that is, so while you can start it and enter it as $0, before you send it to GSA, we have to have the official authorized amount in there. So once that's known, we add that in there, and then we can send it to GSA. Let's just say, whoops. Say $10,000. Actually, let's just say $2,000 for the sake of this demonstration. So just like you can't send GSA a $0 RWA on paper today, you can't send us a $0 RWA electronically either. So you can't send us essentially all of this information until we know or until we've agreed upon a dollar amount through the cost estimate. Now that I've done that, I'm going to say I still want Tony to electronically sign this, so I'm going to send it to GSA. I also have the opportunity to upload any other documents here. It doesn't have to just be uploading a copy of the form. If you manually sign, you can upload other relevant documents at this point in time as well. And now we send to GSA. So just giving me a confirmation of what happens now in case, depending on which scenario I chose, manual signature or digital signature. And now this has been sent to GSA. So at this point in time, the GSA data entry user, in this case Maria, would have received an email telling her that Social Security Administration has filled out everything, all the required fields on their 4 tabs, and now it's in our wheelhouse to finish off the RWA and route it for digital signature before we can formally accept it. So from here, that's when GSA would come in. They'd come into the system on our end in eRETA, and they'd fill out these final 3 tabs here for our PBS information, the authorized details, and then finally who's going to sign the RWA on behalf of GSA. Once they did all that, they'd route it for signature. So I'm kind of speaking to that because this is obviously what we would do, not so much that you have any control over as a customer, so I don't want to dwell too much on that. What I do want to show you next before I take another pause for questions is the following. So all new RWA. Now let's take the concept of amending an RWA. So let's say we've already accepted the RWA and you want to make an amendment to it or initiate an amendment with GSA. Now the nice thing about this, initiating amendments, is that we are not including you to only amend RWAs that you created from scratch. Any RWA that's ever been accepted today or 20 years ago, if it's still open anyway, you have the ability to request an amendment or make changes to it. So if there was an RWA you submitted to GSA back in January of 2017, before you had data entry rates, you can still look that RWA up here and make an amendment to it or make an amendment request. So let me try that here. Let me clear out the search screen here. Let me continue with my theme of being Social Security. I'll just look for Social Security. Let's find an open RWA, an open N type from that was accepted sometime in fiscal year 2016. And let's say we'll continue with the Region 3 theme. No, I didn't have to put in all those search criteria. I just chose to whittle it down to a smaller volume. So there's 13 records found for N types that are still open in Region 3. So let me open up one of these RWAs here. So let's say, for example, this RWA we kept having to charge back because maybe the BOAC was wrong, maybe the customer order number was missing and I wanted to update that, or something was wrong and I just wanted to make a fix to it so that on subsequent bills or whatever the case might be, the wrong value could now be corrected and show up correctly. So even though this RWA was entered entirely by GSA, at least in the system, because you didn't have access to enter RWAs at this point in time in the past, you could still edit it because it is a Social Security RWA. If I click the edit button on an already accepted RWA, what will happen here is you will be given this drop-down, input codes. Input codes, you don't have to memorize what an input code is. It's really language, computer language to tell the system how to behave based on what your selection is. But you have 4 potential input codes. So you have a customer administrative change, which we call an E input code. If you have a change to the BOAC or some other billing information because we're billing incorrectly, you could select the H input code for that change. If you want to alert GSA to say, you know what, we don't want this project anymore, we want to cancel it, or hey, you started some of that work, but we don't need the rest of it, so let's call it early completion. Let's halt the project of service. You can enter that input code here. And then the last thing is a major change. If you want to change the scope of work or add to it or detract from it, if you need to give us additional funds, that's how you'd initiate that with an X input code for an amount or scope change. So there's 4 different changes here, potential changes, and based on what you select, that tells RETA what fields to make editable and which fields not to make editable, and then allow you to process it. So an E input code, a clearly administrative change, is one that you can actually do as the customer and immediately send it to our financial management system. GSA does not have to review those changes. You have a clear-cut path to make that change and send it immediately into our system so that then future billing statements or whatever are automatically impacted. The other 3, the H input code, the N input code, and the X input code are amendments you initiate, but GSA has to review them before we officially submit them. And in some cases, they will require, especially if you change a dollar amount, for example, they will require a new signature as well. So that's what's going on here. So what you'll see here, let me do an E input code to quickly show you. So don't think that because I just told you that, Steve said that the E input code allows me to submit it directly into their database. They don't need the GSA region to review it. Well, that's true, but only certain fields are editable on the E input code. So obviously you couldn't sneak in a dollar amount change on the E input code. That would be grayed out. So you can see the dollar amount here, that field's grayed out. The only fields I have to edit are my FPDS codes, for example. My customer order number is editable here if it's missing. And some of these other fields are editable if you wanted to make that change. Similarly, if I just go to the next screen, you can see here, I can't change any of the funding information on an E input code because it's just an administrative change. The only thing I could change is the agency accounting data line. If it was missing a number or value, I could enter that there, but I can't change the funding type or the treasury symbol or the dollar amount. I can only change the accounting data line. And then last but not least, I can't change who signed the RWA or request new signatures because this is purely an administrative change that I'm requesting here. But what you see here is you see this button that says Submit to Pegasus. Pegasus is what we call a financial management system. Just like we call eRETA our RWA tracking application, Pegasus is what GSA calls our financial management system. Every accepted RWA and accepted amendment is sent down to Pegasus, and then Pegasus is then later in charge of generating all of the RWA bills. So in this case, the button says submit to Pegasus, which means you're allowed to submit this particular e-input code directly into our financial management database. Anything else, any of those other 3 input codes I was showing you, the X, the H, or the N, the button here would instead say send to GSA, because in that case, you would, or GSA would have to review your changes, and only GSA then could accept or reject those changes to formally submit them down to Pegasus. All right, we'll take a little pause here before I show you one more of these input codes for amending already existing RWAs. So do we have any new questions, Eric?
Steve, we don't have any questions imminent, but I do want to just take a moment to remind all of the participants that following this session, we will be posting a version of all of the questions and answers that we've addressed in the chat, as well as frequently asked questions that you and your team have put together for their leisure reading. We're going to put those up on the eRETA website and also the Client Engagement Series website. And this session, as well as all Client Enrichment Series, are recorded and available for playback on gsa.gov/CES.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Eric, for that. Yeah, great. And I see my colleagues vigorously answering a lot of your questions in the chat, so it sounds like they're doing a great job if they're not leaving any questions for me. So I appreciate your help, guys. So I just submitted this one to Pegasus to show you what it looks like. I don't know. It could fail. I don't know if our test environment is linked up to the test Pegasus environment, so that's always the gamble you make when using our test environments. But hopefully it finishes quickly so I can show you the last few minutes of the live demonstration that I wanted to show you, and then we can kind of round out today's special presentation. I'll give this a few more seconds before I just abort it. All right, there we go. Successfully submitted. All right, good to know. So that's the message you would ideally see when you did your own e-input code, that the changes you made. In this case, I changed just the customer order number, or I added the missing customer order number. And now I know that my customer order number is successfully submitted to Pegasus. And on subsequent billing statements I see from this point forward, I should see my customer order number populated on those screens. Now, the other input codes I'll show you really, really quickly. So if you have a BOAC that needs changing, or an agency location code that needs changing, or, for example, the treasury symbol that needs changing, you would select the H input code. And similarly, the difference is now different fields. If I select this just to quickly show you, different fields on those 3 tabs now become open and editable. So if you recall from the E input code, when I did that, all of these, or pretty much all of these values on this particular screen were all grayed out. I could not change them. I could only change these few down here in the bottom right corner. Now you see I can change the billing type, the billing frequency, my agency location code, my BOAC, the billing point of contact if I didn't have one listed before, so I can change several more fields than I could on that E input code. Likewise, here on the Accounting Details tab, you can see I can now change the fund year, fund type, and treasury symbol. Let me go back, though, to show you one other input code here. So really, based on that selection, is what, on that pull-down menu, is what tells RETA and eRETA which fields to make editable and allow you to change, and which ones you're not allowed to change. So the last one I want to show you is this N input code. If you want to communicate to GSA that, you know what, we started this work, we did requirements summit, we accepted the RWA, but upon further discussions with management here, we're going to cancel this RWA. We're not going to do it after all. And so that's how you might, this N input code is you might be able to communicate that to GSA. So here, you see when I select that, whole different screen, completely different. So here, we have some basic instructions which says, hey, if the GSA obligations bucket above is greater than $0, you may be billed for work that has already been initiated. So if we've already done some work, even though you're telling us you don't want any more, Unfortunately, the agreement that you signed, the RWA that you signed, says that you will reimburse GSA for any expenses incurred. So if we did incur some expenses already, we do have to bill you by our policy and by law. If this is an R-type RWA that you want to cancel or have early complete and you don't need the services, this is also a method you could use to communicate that to GSA. Really, it all comes down to here is we want a detail of a justification of what you're trying to accomplish, whether you're early canceling or early completing the project, so we've done some of it, but now you don't need the rest of it, or we've accepted the RWA, but now on second thought, your agency no longer needs it and you want to cancel it entirely. That's what the justification block is here for you to communicate to GSA. So enter as much of that as possible. And then that'll be routed to the GSA region that owns the RWA. They'll review your request. Again, this is not one you can just submit to Pegasus and it'll automatically happen. We, as GSA, have to review it. If we accept it or approve it, we'll process that transaction and enter the completion or cancellation date accordingly, and then send you the completion letter or cancellation letter accordingly. Or if we review the justification and say this is not an appropriate use or request for this particular RWA, we have to keep it open for reasons X, Y, or Z, we'll write back to you with that information. So, but this is at least a way to start that conversation if necessary. Okay, well, I covered as much as I could about this. There's a lot of functionality here between entering your work request, entering your new RWA, and then transition here to requesting amendments to accepted RWAs. I'm going to stop right here because we have about 13 minutes left and kind of jump back into our, to finalize the presentation that we had for you. And then if we have time for some more questions, we certainly will answer them. So let me start slideshow back up here. Okay, so we've given you a lot of information today. We've given you a lot of websites to go to today. We also have this map. This map is a list of our regional RWA managers. And it looks like it's a little bit cut off, so the slides we'll send to you, we'll make sure we don't cut off the bottom half here. But if you ever have a specific question about a specific project, that's where this map comes in handy. Emailing us at our eRETA email address to say, hey, when is project ABC going to be complete, will be very useful because we don't have in-depth details on a project-by-project basis, but someone in that geographic region certainly does. So this list of our RWA managers can serve as a nice focal point to reach out to. And I probably should have flip-flopped that slide with this slide here because we have some other questions. So if you ever have questions, these are some great resources to go to after today. So if you have eRETA questions specific about using the system, entering your RWAs online, using digital signatures, go to our website. Again, I mentioned this website about 400 times. I think I'm a little bit short of that, but this is probably the 10th time I've said gsa.gov/eRETA. Lots of resources there on our system, how to gain access, the user guides, stuff like that. If you have more generic RWA questions, so not so much specific to the systems, but RWAs and how GSA manages them and how we use them, we have lots of information on our RWA website, which is gsa.gov/RWA. And then these email addresses are also peppered on those websites, which is for a fast track for them. If you have specific questions and you can't find the answer on our FAQs on either of those websites, or the information just doesn't seem to be obvious to you on those websites, you can email us those questions at eRETA@gsa.gov, at least for system-specific questions. General RWA questions would be the askRWA@gsa.gov email box. And then if you really drill down, and that's why I said those two slides were probably out of order, that was my fault. If you have specific questions on a specific RWA project or service, that's where the regional RWA map would come in, manager map, the regional RWA manager map, try saying that 4 times fast, would come into play for you to reach out to someone at the ground level to get you in touch with appropriate people that get you an answer to your questions on what the progress or status of a specific service or project might be. So with all that said, I'm going to stop talking here and turn it back over to Eric to close us out with any final questions they might have for us, or worst case, we can begin promoting the final sessions we have to offer to you all.
Yeah, Steve, thank you very much. I know that our experts are answering some final questions in the chat box. I want to take a minute to thank you. As you and the others may have picked up on, these sessions are usually an hour, which tripped me up. So for you to go this extra mile, I think I appreciate it, and I hope all of the users did too. Certainly a lot of these new digital enhancements to the system will eliminate a lot of the burden in the hand of the users. So thanks to you. Thanks to our RWA experts in the chat, Jeff and Ashley, and thanks to Andrea Bell, the glue that keeps our client enrichment series together, and also thank you to all of the clients who participated today. As Steve mentioned, there will be an encore performance of this particular program, and that will be on May 31st at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you wanted to come back and see it again, or if you wanted to more specifically pass it along to your colleagues. And then we also have another version of this, the RWA digital signature function. We got a little bit of that today, but Steve is going to go into much greater detail on that on June 1st at 2 p.m. That's Eastern. You can register now, www.gsa.gov/ERETA. That's where you can find all of that information that Steve shared with you today. And as I mentioned, once we get all of our questions copied out of here and take a look at them, we'll couple that with the frequently asked questions. We'll make those publicly available. We also record this and all of our client enrichment series sessions and post those and archive them, www.gsa.gov/CES. And at this time, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of your day wherever in the country you are. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll come back next time.